Dispatches from the front.
It's the second month of NATO's bombing campaign. The American air armada is ballooning from 500 to 800 aircraft. 33,000 reservists got the call to arms this week. But with the White House tightly controlling the news, what do we really know about this war and the adversary? In an in-depth interview most Americans haven't seen, probing questions were put to Slobodan Milosevic about the war, peace, and the treatment of 3 U.S. Army servicemen in Serbian custody. The reporter who met with Milosevic is credited with securing consent for Red Cross visits with the prisoners. What should you know about the Milosevic interview? We'll ask this military intelligence expert turned war correspondent, Dr. Ron Hatchett.
From Washington, D.C., John McLaughlin's One-on-One, an unrehearsed probing inside exchange with and about the people making the news.
Brought to you in part by ADM. Feeding the world is the biggest challenge of the new century, which is why ADM promotes satellite technology to help the American farmer be even more productive. ADM, supermarket to the world.
And by...
For nearly 200 years, Chase has been building the right relationships, creating more opportunities than ever before. Chase, the right relationship is everything.
Here's the host, John McLaughlin.
Before we hear more about Ron Hatchett's exclusive interview with Slobodan Milosevic, here is the profile of our distinguished guest.
Born Corsicana, Texas. 55 years of age, wife Janae, 4 children, Republican, Roman Catholic, graduate U.S. Air Force Academy, California State University, San Diego, M.A. Eastern European Studies, University of Zagreb, Croatia, Certificate of Balkan Studies, University of Texas, Austin, Ph.D., Soviet and Eastern European Studies, U.S. Air Force, officer, Intelligence and Political Military Affairs, primarily in Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, the Middle East, and Vietnam. 20 years. Reagan administration, Secretary of Defense representative to 3 multinational security organizations in Europe, including NATO. 5 years. Texas A&M University, Mosher Institute for International Political Policy, Deputy Director, 5 years. University of St. Thomas, Center for International Studies, Director, 5.5 years, and currently, KHOU Television, Houston, World Affairs Analyst, 3 years and currently, author, 2 books, including European Arms Control, Problems and Prospects, Hobbies, Sailing, Flying Light Airplanes. Ronald Lester Hatchett.
Dr. Hatchett, give us the background of your exclusive interview with Slobodan Milosevic.
Well, John, I went over there primarily because of the efforts of one man here in America, a Serbian-American with Croatian background as well, named Bob Koprivica.
Old man?
He's 80 years old. He's a retired businessman. He lives in Butte, Montana.
What did he do for you?
Well, he has a lot of connections with the government there in Yugoslavia, primarily business connections. And when all of this started with his homeland here in America, he was born here, even though he is of Serbian extraction. He wanted to do something to see if we couldn't breach, we couldn't narrow some of this distance between us.
So he essentially got you cleared through the layers of bureaucracy in Belgrade.
That's right. He got me in, got the visa for me to get in, and I was able to meet with people in the foreign ministry there, and I was there primarily to try to see the American prisoners and to see what we could do to alleviate their situation.
Let's elaborate some of the points made by yourself and Milosevic during their interview, and I'd like to play in that connection the first bite where he talks about the ethnic composition of Serbia.
In Serbia, there are 26 different national minorities. There was never any problem with any of national minorities in Serbia, including Albanians, but problems were only with separation movement of Albanians in Kosovo.
What is he essentially saying here?
What he's saying is that our perception that the Serbs are intent on creating an ethnically pure Serbian state is a misconception. He points out that 35% of the people who live in Serbia are non-Serbs. And there are 26 different ethnic groups in that country. And he says we only have problems with one.
Let's look at a card that illustrates that ethnic population of Serbia. As we see on the screen, there are 7.3 million Serbs. There are 1.9 million Albanians. That number has to be revised because it's a pre-Exodus number. And we also have to say that many of those, most of those live in Kosovo. But how many are there in Serbia proper, excluding Kosovo?
There's about 250,000.
250,000. Hungarians are 892,000. Gypsies, 156,000, almost 157. Montenegrin, 156. And other 1.2 million. How are those ethnic groups treated living in Serbia proper?
Well, that's the thing that he points out and that I saw for myself. I was able to travel to the northern portion of the country where there is an autonomous region called the Vojvodina. It, along with Kosovo, were the two big autonomous areas in Serbia.
Did you talk to gypsies?
I was able to go to a gypsy village, a Hungarian village, and a Slovak village. And what I found in all three of those locations were the people telling me, stop the bombing.
Did you select your own sites?
I got to choose where I wanted to go.
You had freedom of movement?
I had complete freedom of movement. I was sitting at the assembly there of the assembly of the Vojvodina, and I was talking to the president of the Vojvodina. He had a couple of his non-Serb ministers there. One was a Slovene and one was a Slovak, and I said, but let me go out and see the people. So I asked, I knew there was a Hungarian village. I said, I'm Roman Catholic. I want to see a Catholic village here. And I just chose the village of Budovica, which was located about 10 miles outside of Novi Sad, and I went out to that village.
Who governs Vojvodina?
Vojvodina is governed, it's an autonomous region. It's governed by an assembly that has a president, and every ethnic group is guaranteed representation.
Are any of the ethnic groups in the government of Vojvodina?
Yes, there are 8 different ethnic groups in that government in Vojvodina.
Is the mayor a Serb?
The president of that area happens to be a Serb, but several of his ministers are non-Serbs.
I was thinking of Novi Sad, the mayor there.
Novi Sad, I'm not sure about the mayor.
I'm told that the vice mayor is Albanian, or perhaps it was the vice president of Vojvodina, the whole region.
It could well be, because there are Albanians there. I talked to a school teacher, for example.
Can you argue that Milosevic is not a genocidal Hitler, that he is not really an ethnic cleanser, in view of the fact that, 200,000 Albanians live in Serbia proper, and they live, you think, happily?
Well, again, I don't know, John. I haven't talked to all of the Albanians there. All I do know is there are no reports of any other kind of ethnic cleansing going on in the Vojvodina. There's also an area called Sanjak that has a large percentage
How
of
about
Muslims.
closer to Belgrade?
In Belgrade proper, I was able to, for example, just by chance, I was going to see damage that was done at the heating plant that provides hot water heating to high-rise buildings there in Belgrade. It was hit early in the war, and I was going to see the damage. And it just happened that the guard on the gate was an Albanian. And he proceeded to, when he saw that I had an American passport, to really berate me about the bombing here. He was saying, I've lived in this town for 28 years, and I have not felt any discrimination.
Why then is Milosevic charged with depopulating the Albanians from Kosovo?
Well, because there are a lot of Albanians leaving. There's 600,000 of them now that have left that country.
Why are his soldiers driving them out and committing atrocities?
Well, now he would say he's not driving them out. He would say they're being driven out by the bombing primarily, but he also points out that many of them are leaving voluntarily because they are from villages and areas where the KLA, up until very recently, held sway.
What's the KLA?
The KLA is the Kosovo Liberation Army.
And who are they?
It's the main fighting force that's fighting for separation from Yugoslavia.
Up until 1997, the KLA was characterized as a terrorist organization by the State Department.
That's
are they
true.
terrorists, or are they good? Are they the good guys?
It depends on what our policy is at the time. And as late as February of 1998, our Balkan emissary, Robert Gelbard, said the KLA is definitely a terrorist organization. This is February of 1998. Now that we've shifted our positions, now they are freedom fighters, and we're talking about arming them to enable them to get freedom.
Is the essential point that Milosevic makes is that he's trying to put down a rebellion caused by a terrorist organization, the KLA?
That's precisely the point that he made to me. Now, I talked to him on tape for 66 minutes. I talked to him privately for another hour and a half. And in that, he made that point. I have problems only with one ethnic group, and it's because that ethnic group is trying to hive off part of the territory of our country and make it an independent enclave.
Right, and he has 200,000 Albanians living in Serbia proper, up and around Belgrade and Vojvodina.
That's true.
And they're happy. They're contented. As a matter of fact, they blasted you because the NATO was dropping bombs.
That's true.
But the Albanians that are there in Kosovo, the core group, the militant group, but he revoked autonomy in 1990. Was there cause for him to do that on the basis of the KLA causing an uprising and wanting a separatist state?
Well, after the death of Tito in 1980, there was a lot of ethnic rebellion in that province, and the predecessors of the KLA began to discriminate against non-Albanians in that province. And
how much killing was going on by those rebel groups that later became the KLA?
Well, again, it was on both sides. Our estimates from our people were that 2,000 people had been killed, and of those, about 30% were non-Albanians.
So through the eyes of Milosevic and his government, he saw this as a secessionist group, a separatist group, who in fact really wanted to become part of Greater Albania, and Hoxha, who was then ruling Albania, wanted them in. Correct?
That's correct.
Did they want an ethnically pure state? That is the KLA and his group, and their group.
That was what they were trying to do, according to the Serbs, in the 1980s. According to statistics, they drove 130,000 non-Albanians out of Kosovo during that time period.
Let me play this bite for you.
Your government is running two wars against Yugoslavia, against our people. One is military war, and the other war is media war, or, if you like it better, propaganda war.
Do you believe it's a propaganda war?
Well, I think to a large extent it is. I mean, we're trying to depict him as this bloodthirsty guy. We're trying to depict this as being solely the problems of one man, Slobodan Milosevic, and it's not. The Serbian people are, I found, pretty well united behind the idea of holding on to Kosovo as part of
How much freedom of information is there in Serbia proper?
Well, I was able to see, both in my hotel and at the home of some Serbian people I visited for their Easter meal.
Were they elite Serbs who just happened to have cable television?
These were working class Serbs with a one-bedroom apartment, and I had Easter meal with them after Easter Mass on their Easter Sunday.
Did they have CNN?
They had CNN, they had BBC, they had Sky Channel, and all of these things that we're seeing, the images they had on their television.
What images?
The images of the Kosovo refugees, the statements that they're making about being driven out of their homes.
The CNN replay of the briefings of NATO?
Actually, we saw it live there. We saw live every day the 3 o'clock briefing at NATO and the rundown on the bombing.
Have you heard NATO say that the people of Serbia are not being fed the information about the atrocities and about the exodus?
That's just not true. I mean, anybody that has been there, and there are plenty of Western journalists there, they know that they can see CNN, Sky Channel, BBC.
You know that NATO has focused very hard on bombing the Serbian television in various locations, trying to stop it altogether. Is it possible that the NATO forces are trying to deny videotape footage for CNN and for the people in Serbia to see, and for Americans to see, because Americans do not, because Clinton and the NATO High Command does not want Americans primarily to be exposed to the carnage that NATO bombing is doing.
Well, John, the only thing I can say is that we know here in America, every time we see any film that shows the results of the bombing in Yugoslavia, it always has a little trailer at the bottom says, these pictures are from Serbian TV.
Which means be careful of their veracity. You saw Serbian TV while you were in Belgrade. You saw the same pictures that we saw over here.
Yes.
Do you have any reason to believe that any of those pictures of the bombing, carnage, and destruction perpetrated by NATO was in fact spurious?
No, because in several of these incidents, I was able to go out and see it with my own eyes and take my own home video camera there and take pictures.
Did you see any of our military weaponry in action?
I saw a cruise missile the first night I was there. It was pretty impressive.
You mean from your hotel window?
From my hotel window. About 400 meters. It came down the Sava River, which was about 400 meters.
What did it sound like?
Like about a 747 landing in the parking lot.
What did it then do after it passed your hotel?
It made a hard banking left turn off of the river into the downtown area and hit the military headquarters, the old military headquarters.
Was that the headquarters with the hospital immediately next to it?
No, this was after that strike. The cruise missiles that hit the headquarters, that was a police headquarters, and very accurate, these cruise missiles. They took out this Serbian police barracks right in the heart of Belgrade, 200 meters from a hospital that was the largest hospital in the Balkans.
But the accuracy of the bombing is clearly limited in as much as NATO has, in one instance this week, bombed the wrong country, right?
Well, that's true. I mean, the cruise missile is accurate. These other type of bombs, even the so-called smart bombs, laser-guided bombs, are not entirely accurate all the time, because if any smoke crosses that path, they can go off.
Quickly, do you see any signs of the deterioration of the regime and its support by the Serbian people? Any signs?
I certainly didn't see that up until the time I left on the 19th of this month.
Do you think it's having a counter effect, that it's solidifying support, NATO bombing, underneath Milosevic and the other, what, 5 associate prime ministers?
3.
3.
There's no doubt about that, John. I mean, before this bombing began, I would say 50 to 60% of the people really didn't support Milosevic as president. Now everybody seems to support him. On all of these rallies that you see downtown, there's all these placards of Slobodan Milosevic. I talked to this one young lady, and I said, if we could get rid of Slobodan Milosevic for you, would that solve the problem? She says, no, because now we are all Slobodan Milosevic, because we are all united in saying that Kosovo is Serbia and must remain.
One final question on this subject. Is Milosevic a free agent? Politically speaking.
Not as much as we would like to think. He's in a coalition government. There are 250 seats in the Serbian parliament. His party and his wife's party control 110. So to control that parliament, which sends the people that elects the president, it's elected by the Federal Assembly, he has to control the Serbian parliament. Now, that means he needs a coalition partner. Right now, he has a partnership with the Serbian Radical Party, which has 82 seats.
That's Schlesel?
That's Šešelj. That gives him control of, in essence, of this. So he has to listen to this guy.
Who else is in the parliament?
Well, there are other...
What's the third group?
The third big group is something called the Serbian Renewal Party, which is headed by a guy named Vuk Drašković. Now, Vuk Drašković, the wolf, Vuk means wolf. And
how many seats does he have?
He has 45.
Now, do these prevent Milosevic from really acting alone in extraordinary decisions?
Yes, it does. For example, I was told before I went that I would be able to see the prisoners and, quote, negotiate for their release. By the time I got there, Šešelj said, absolutely no, the bombing that you're doing downtown against non-military targets has made it impossible for us to release these people, and I was not able to see them.
Drašković was fired this week. The wolf. It is said by NATO that this shows that the regime is cracking. The wolf then went on television, or earlier on television, in fact, which NATO overlooked apparently. He said, do not interpret this as any sign of any division in the purpose of Serbia's resistance, that we remain united and as united as ever. Is that not what he said?
That's what he said, and I think it's probably true. I think he was fired primarily because he's kind of a loose cannon. He speaks too quickly. And he was giving away state secrets. He was talking about the bottom line of what they would agree to in a settlement. And it went further than the government has admitted thus far publicly.
Let's talk about the resolution of this conflict. And to start that off, here's a bite from Milosevic.
Of course, we are ready to accept UN civilian mission. Of course, without representatives of the countries who participated aggression against our country.
What do you make of his words, we are ready to accept UN civilian mission?
Well, he knows that
He's talking about into Kosovo.
That's right.
Repatriation.
That's right.
Rebuilding.
That's right.
Reconstruction and policing.
You know,
right?
That's right. I asked him on tape these questions, and then afterwards I talked to him in depth about it in our one-on-one afterwards, off camera. And I told him point blankly that this idea that he can have a negotiated outcome without an armed international presence is just not going to work. It's not going to be acceptable. And I think he knows that. What he's doing right now is setting out his initial negotiating position, but at the end of the day, he will accept autonomy as long as it's autonomy and not independence. He will accept the return of the refugees. He said so on tape. And even though on tape he would not accept it, I think in the final analysis he'll accept an armed military force.
Will he accept autonomy for Kosovo?
He said he would, as long as it's really autonomy. Rambouillet, in his mind, and I think in the mind of anybody that reads it, was not autonomy.
What was it?
It was independence. It was de facto independence. I mean, when you have the right of a province to have laws that cannot be superseded by the central government, when you have the right of a province to conduct its own foreign policy and its own economic policy, that's not autonomy.
He wants a civilian force coming in. There was no mention of NATO. In fact, he said NATO cannot come in, particularly the belligerents, the United States and the British. Did he say that to you?
He said that on tape, but afterwards he knows that a civilian force is not going to be enough. Now, in the military force, he wants it to be an international military force, and he will probably argue that it can include Americans or British.
Would he would therefore be against the United States and the Brits being the co-commanders of that force?
Absolutely.
Because it's not a military force.
That's right.
So therefore it should be led by who? The French?
Well, he says it should be led by the United Nations, and it should be up to the United Nations. Now, the Russians are talking about a Russian and neutral country, but I think there's going to have to be some NATO presence in that.
How about a Russian and a French co-commander situation with deputy co-commanders Britain and the United States?
Well, I think that a Russian-French co-commander would probably be acceptable. Anything that says there's an American commander or British commander, because in the eyes of the Serbs, we are the main ones that are prosecuting this war.
Would the 1995 Dayton framework work here? That is, the UN grants authority, a multinational force goes in, and France and Russia supply the co-commanders, and the U.S. and the Brits participation is held low because they have to fear any guerrilla terrorist activity against them, whom you describe even in the civilized Belgrade, Serbs and apparently some Albanians hate.
That's true.
True?
That's true, and I think that is a workable solution.
How about the arming of them? They say sidearm.
Well, it's got to be
sidearms only.
It's got to be more than that. They have got to be credible so that the Albanian refugees feel that if there is a problem, that they can be protected. It can't be like the UN force that was originally in Bosnia. It has to be more like the UN force or the NATO force that's in Bosnia right now.
And the condition seems to be when the bombing stops. But couldn't he pull out his Serb regulars completely and then leave some paramilitaries in and some civil police in, because he has to run the state. He will not tolerate NATO administering in a civilian way a state, correct?
That's correct. That would be the end.
Could NATO yield on that?
Well, they're going to have to if we're going to have a negotiated settlement. The only alternative would be for us to conquer Yugoslavia totally and impose that.
In the post-settlement era, will Milosevic stay in power?
I think in the near term, John, he's going to have to, because he's going to be the guy that's going to put the deal together with the West. But I wouldn't think he'll be around very long. I mean, the next presidential elections and parliamentary elections are supposed to be in the summer of the year 2001. By that time, he will be gone.
If his popularity is soaring now, what reason is to believe that?
Well, it's soaring right now because the war is on, and they're in crisis and they're rallying around. But the reality is that within the Yugoslavian people, and especially within the business community, they know that the future of that country, it depends on it being integrated economically into Europe and the rest of the world, and they know that's not going to happen as long as Milosevic is leading the country.
And now they see it being incinerated.
Well, absolutely, and they're going to rally around him and fight behind him. It'd be like sort of like Churchill at the end of World War II. When it was over, he was out.
Do you think that the components of a settlement of a resolution are on the table?
I think they're in the air, definitely. President Clinton is talking about autonomy is what we're after, not independence. He's emphasized that. President Milosevic is saying, I will give autonomy. The President Clinton is talking about international military force, not a NATO military force. I think the deal is there in the circulation in the diplomatic
Could the
business.
president come out of this and claim victory?
I think he can.
What can he say?
I think at the end of the day, the president's going to be able to look the American people in the eye and say, I have autonomy for the Albanians.
I said I'd get it, and we have it.
I have it. I have the return of the refugees. I have an international military force that's going to be there for a minimum of 3 years to guarantee the resettlement of these people.
And we also have Rambouillet's requirement that Kosovo remain part of Serbia.
That's true. I mean, we say in Rambouillet that that was our objective. Now, the reality, Rambouillet took it away from Serbia the moment Serbs would have signed that thing. It would have taken it away. But under this negotiated deal that I'm talking about, it will be true autonomy, not independence.
Do you think that Milosevic would viciously badmouth Clinton after we have a settlement?
You know, I told President Milosevic that the president will not walk away from this without those conditions being met. I said he has got to assure the American people that he has victory here. And Milosevic said, if he will do this deal, I will let him claim victory. I will let him claim he beat me to death. I don't care.
Do you have any reason to believe that Milosevic is telling you the truth?
Well, I think, you know...
what did he say? What did Holbrooke say about Milosevic at Dayton?
Well, at Dayton, Holbrooke said Slobodan Milosevic is a man that we can do business with. He understands the complexities of the Balkans, and we can do business with.
Did he not also say that we have no doubt that Milosevic will live up to the agreement?
He said that in Dayton. That's true. And he did help us implement that.
You were there, and you got a quick observation of his character. Give me a 2-second description of him.
Well, I think he's very much of a pragmatic fellow. I think he's a consummate politician.
Does he have character?
He has... I think he has character in the sense that he shows the humanness of himself. He shows anger. He shows...
you trust him?
I think I would not buy a used car maybe from him without having it checked out, but I think that he can be dealt with.
Thanks so much for being my guest, Ron Hatchett, and good luck.
Thank you.
John McLaughlin's One-on-One.
Brought to you in part by ADM.